I wanted to highlight a couple of assignments that I had worked on for COS 312, an introduction to game programming with the Unity game engine. The first is an assignment on particles, where we had to sort of play with the particle system to create, various effects. So I decided to make force fields, which are basically these cylindrical particles. So some of them are going up, some of them are going down, some of them are sparkling. So it has sort of an effective kind of a force field in place, holding these aliens kind of in stasis. The meshes and textures are from the asset store for this assignment. The next particle system is this water spraying out of a pipe. It's sort of streaming and flowing down, and when it hits, it sort of turns into this other kind of particles that looks kind of like, ripples going through water. It's a very basic, simple effect. The next one is the next ones are sparks. They're animated to look kind of random, but it's actually just a looping animation. And then there's simple smoke streaming out of this this damaged stasis chamber. And then the last effect are these lasers shooting out of this animated spaceship. They have a trail renderer to make them look, like lasers. And when they hit, they sort of have this little explosion of sparks and particles, like, clouds of smoke. And, it kind of have like sound effects as they're going by. And light. The next project is the one of physics that I want to show. In this assignment, we had to create a bunch of little things with the physics engine. But what I decided to do was I have these light balls, heavy balls, and so they kind of interact with different things. Like these light ones are, do nothing to these heavy stone blocks, basically, because their blocks are so heavy. And then for the heavy cannonballs, they kind of they don't have any problem knocking stuff down. The sounds, a lot of the sounds I have, sort of, it uses the speed of the impact to determine the loudness of the sound effect. So, kind of like when the boxes are falling and tumbling, and you kind of make tumbling and falling sounds. We had to use various joints and constraints. So these ones, at the tops of each of these tubes, there are joints to cause them to sway or around. So these are kind of like chimes. The sound effect is pitch shifted to make each one have a sort of a unique sound. And so, it's kind of like make it sound like what a tube of that size should sound like. And so, these chimes can swing around, collide with each other, and have it be a fairly, realistic sound for their interactions. The next one is I got from Turbo Squid a free mesh. This is the Predator I brought it into Blender, decimated it to reduce the polygon count, gave it a texture mapping with the ambient occlusion, so you kind of see the details a little bit more. But then I used a plugin in Blender to, the plugin is called I think it's called Fracture, and so basically you can kind of make it so things are sort of fractured. So when these collide, there's enough force, they sort of like break apart. So these are sort of pre-fractured in Blender, and then kind of held together, you know, in a way where the joints break when, you know, enough force is applied. And the last one's a simple door that kind of makes a doorbell sound. I think the cannonball was moving too fast one of those times. Just sort of went through it, but... So this is the project on physics that we had to do, or what I decided to do for that project. Let's see, the next one I want to highlight is the hover car. One of the projects that we could work on was a hover car based on a tutorial, but I decided to extend mine to use 5 rays projecting down out of the hover car, so that the closer it is to the ground, the more force is pushed up at that point of that ray. It has like a, so it sort of can follow along the terrain, you know, it could fly and follow the terrain. You know, if you're going really fast, it might collide with the terrain a little. And it has like a little piece of a script I found online that helps keep the ships pointed upright, so they don't flip over upside down and get stuck. The green ones are flying around randomly. Just sort of, you know, I just wanted to have a lot of stuff going on, and sort of to test them out to see how well they handle flying around without really messing up. You know, and this red one you can control yourself. The ships were modeled in Blender just fairly quickly. I just wanted to have some, you know, something that looked like a spaceship in place. One thing I was thinking of possibly doing was, I was thinking this could be kind of possibly an interesting starting point for a game. Maybe some sort of like arena-based hovercraft combat. If you could imagine like shooting lasers in the direction that the mouse pointer is pointing, so I could kind of like fly this way and be shooting at this ship way off to the side. You know, maybe have like an online versus, but I don't know. I don't know if I'll get around to making something like that. But it seems like, you know, it's a potentially interesting kind of idea. The next thing I want to highlight was is what the final game was originally going to be. But as I was working on it, I realized that the scope of the project was too large for the time that I had available. It's called Lunar Logger. I created this you know, simple kind of cartoon character in Blender, where you could swing an axe, jump. I don't have jumping animation yet. You know, run around with a custom character controller and interact with things. The basic story was going to be that the moon passed through the tail of a strange comet, sort of seeding the moon with unusual alien life. And so one of the things was sort of these crystal trees were going to start growing up all around the moon. And so that's why the Lunar Logger is here, is because, you know, there's a lot of money to be made harvesting crystal trees on the moon. So these crystal shards are going to act kind of as a form of currency in the game. While you're on the moon, your oxygen is going to be slowly draining, but if you get damaged, it's going to drain faster, you know, as more air leaks out. So you'd have to get oxygen tanks to refill your oxygen, and you have to use the wrench and duct tape to repair your suit. You're going to spend some of your currency, some of those crystal shards at these vending machines. So each time this button is pressed, this oxygen vending machine spits out an oxygen tank, and this repair kit vending machine spits out a repair kit, the duct tape wrench combination. And so things can have sort of this basic interaction. You know, anything that's in front of them, you press the interact button, gets sent an interact message. The camera follows the player, and it slides around things to try to make sure, you know, the view is not obstructed too much. It's just a basic physics kind of based camera. I think it was the kinematic physics. Controls, you know, are relative to the camera's position, so they're kind of like, you know, controls as you'd expect from a modern game. You know, up goes away from the camera, down goes towards, left and right goes left and right relative to the camera. And you know, and then there's this airlock. On the moon there are going to be these sort of moon bases. They're kind of like scientific research centers. They're inflated, you know, there's sort of these inflated bubbles, and outside of them they have these tanks that can be used as sort of decorations. If you can imagine, they have like oxygen or water or something in them. One thing I wanted to do was I wanted to have kind of a persistent world. So, for example, I could cut down that tree, and you know, you kind of see how the state of this world is. If you go in here, it goes to a different scene. It sort of kind of like pulls it into the current scene, and the old scene kind of gets frozen and hidden. You know, and then you could go back out. You know, it's gonna have a better transition than that. You go back out, and it still remains the same. Instead of like reloading the scene and losing everything, or resetting it, you know, to how it was before. The solution I came up with is not entirely perfect, because there are sort of the way that Unity worked for pausing and unpausing things didn't work exactly as I expected, because it doesn't restore them to exactly the same state as they were in when they paused. So I had to do some hacks to kind of like correct things like animation states and stuff like that. So the reason why this game was dropped was primarily because there's a lot of other content I wanted to have. Alien enemies, you know, that are you know, animated and have AI, and I wanted to have some NPC characters, you know, like scientists working in these domes, and I wanted to create a world where you could kind of explore. You know, there's a lot of stuff in it. You know, all this stuff takes time, and the semester is rapidly running out of time for the semester, because I was working on other projects for other classes. This was I was working on this at the same time as the B+ tree project for COS 226, and that was taking up quite a bit of time to debug, make sure that worked properly. So instead, what I did was, for my final project, was I had taken an earlier game that I had made earlier in the semester, and expanded that a little and finished it off. This other project is Attack of the Yellow Snowman. It's kind of like, the game is a lot like Left 4 Dead. You have these Molotov cocktails that you could throw, and have explosive barrels. This uses a lot more assets from like the asset store and the standard assets. Oh, I picked that up, but these boxes of Molotov cocktails that you could get to like replenish your ammo, and these hearts refill health. Like I said, there's explosive barrels. One thing I was experimenting with was, I don't know if this is going to be too apparent. Okay, was trying to have the ground look charred by using the terrain's textures, but it wound up, Unity wound up being a lot slower than I thought it was going to for updating textures. So it wound up being a very low resolution. I didn't think it worked out too well. But anyhow, that's in there. Okay, so anyhow, the reason why there's snowmen is because I wanted to have an enemy that would be very easy for me to model and animate in Blender. They try to aim at you with their snowball throwing. So you can see they're kind of like pulling snowballs sort of out of themselves and throwing them at you. They start out with like a wandering state where they're just kind of like wandering around slowly, not really doing anything, and they sort of have a vision sphere directly in front of them, so that if they see me, if I'm inside their vision sphere, just because that was a very simple shape to use for vision, they see me and switch to a chase state. If they get within a certain distance, they switch to a throwing state. And if they get far away, they switch back to chasing. Originally, I was going to have it so you could fully escape them, and have them switch back to their wandering state, but I realized it was actually much too easy to just outrun them, and have them just kind of ignore you. And so, even as it is right now, you could easily just run away from them, and not worry too much. The goal of this game is fairly simple. It's just follow the path through the woods and try to get to, well, as you can kind of see over there, there's smoke coming out of this chimney of a cabin. So you kind of have to try to get to the cabin at the end, which is sort of a safe area, kind of like the safe house, in Left 4 Dead, and these snowmen, are kind of like zombies. So I'm probably not going to go all the way to the end, because there isn't really much more to show. It's just this, it's just surviving more and more snowmen as you go on through the woods. eventually heading towards the end. Even though this is fairly simple, it was actually... the level design wound up being more time-consuming than I originally thought it was going to be, because originally I was going to have the trees have their own individual colliders, you know, surrounding the trees, but it wound up being really slow because there's so many trees. So I decided instead to sort of have these invisible walls kind of surrounding the perimeter. They don't necessarily follow too tightly, but setting up all those invisible walls all around the edges of the trail proved to be kind of time consuming, trying to get things to be somewhat reasonable. So more health, more Molotov cocktails. So this is basically, you know, the extent of the game. You just kind of go around, follow the path, eventually lead to a clearing where you can get to the safe house. But, you know, considering, you know, time constraints and how much time that has been spent on the other, you know, the other version, the other project for the final that wound up, you know, being too large a scope. You know, this wound up being, you know, it's okay. But that's sort of what my final wound up being. So that's pretty much all I really wanted to show. I mean, the only other thing was a very simple sort of teleportation laser, I guess, where you can kind of imagine it's a navigation puzzle game where you have to figure out how to get to where you need to be, like teleporting through the little hole there, or you could teleport objects around. And it uses various techniques to determine if what you're aiming at is a valid place to teleport to, and figuring out, you know, the closest safe location to teleport to, such as by using you know, nav mesh. You know, if an area it finds the closest area on a nav mesh where you know, the player can stand, and also it uses, you know, it checks a area in front of where you're aiming at to determine, you know, if something can be teleported to that place, you know, that's not going to be teleported inside of something else. So, you know, this could have the potential, probably, of being some other kind of game. Teleport around, but it's not too much to it. So anyhow, those are like all the things that, well, not all the things, but those are, you know, the main things I wanted to show from COS 3.12. So, thanks.